episode number 8. Hello, friends. This is the Expected Returns Podcast. My name is Stephen Lutman. I'm a real estate investor and agent in the capital region of New York State. If this is your first time checking out the show, welcome. Topics here focus primarily on real estate. However, we'll also touch on financial markets, economic data, and really anything that impacts housing. For those watching on YouTube, you can see that we've officially made the transition away from sweater weather, and now we're just going with a nice dress shirt. But for more fun content like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel, SJ Lincoln Realty. There will be some fun things coming out in the next month or so, so subscribe. Make sure you don't miss any of it. And if that's just not enough for you, you need more Steve. Well, I have good news for you. April's Saratoga Business Journal and its sister publication, Glens Falls Business Journal, you can find a piece I wrote on rising mortgage rates. The newspaper is free. You can find it in local banks, some takeout restaurants, or even just by checking out their websites. Again, Saratoga Business Journal, Glens Falls Business Journal, and do me a favor, if you do check it out and you enjoy the content, let them know that you found it informative. And if enough of you do that, perhaps they'll invite me back for some additional content, which would be great. So no intro this week, just straight to your questions. Let's get into it. Question number 1. Steve, with housing prices up 19% last year, surely we're in a bubble, right? So the metric being referenced here is what's called the CoreLogic Case-Shiller Home Price Index. This is national and has a focus on big metros, think LA, Houston, Atlanta. Meaning when you look at your local housing market, it could be radically different. Capital Region, as an example, in 2021 increased at about half that rate, but it's still very helpful because it's good to keep an eye on both the micro and macro in any type of an environment. However, in no universe is a 19% increase healthy. And with wage growth projected to be somewhere in the 3s this year, it's also extremely unsustainable. Deceleration, however, is very different than a bubble bursting. In the early 2000s, we had both the dot-com bubble, where investors lost 3/4 of their money, and some of you will remember the Beanie Baby bonanza, where toys went from retailing for $5 to then being resold on the secondary market for, I kid you not, thousands of dollars, only to eventually end up in thrift stores a couple years later for $1 or $2. What both of these events have in common is both experienced oversupply. Too many unprofitable technology companies in one case, and an oversaturation of new releases in the other. Both being bought by speculators looking for a quick profit with a flip. Today's housing market is very much the opposite. 80% of single-family homes being sold these days are to buyers who actually intend to occupy the property. And at least locally here, supply has never been lower. In the country, 1.6 million homes were built last year. However, that's a fifth of the current shortage needed to fill demand. If prices are to significantly retreat, a bubble bursting, if you will, it won't be because of a sudden change on the supply side of the equation, but instead a reduction in demand. If the Federal Reserve hikes us into a recession, the economy contracts, employment falls off a cliff, that's really the only path I see for home prices crashing. And to be clear, I don't expect that to occur. Steve, the U.S. trade deficit reached its highest point ever last year. Is our country doomed? So let's define what we're talking about. A gap in trade is simply the difference between what you import and what you export. Mexico buys cheese from Wisconsin, that's a U.S. export. You buy a Sony flat screen TV, that's a Japanese import. A trade surplus means you exported more than you imported. A deficit is vice versa. Not all trade deficits are bad things. I have a decade-long trade deficit with Starbucks, meaning I buy more goods from them than they buy from me. But nobody's being taken advantage of in this situation. It's very much a consensual coming together of buyers and sellers. Now, if Starbucks was owned by, say, the state of New York, who was subsidizing the cost of coffee so that they artificially undercut competitors on price, okay, that's a different conversation. The widely used example here is Chinese steel companies offering their products to American buyers at prices substantially lower than US manufacturers. And they're able to do this because their costs are subsidized by the Chinese Communist Party. And before you say, Steve, we got to do something about this. Well, if you want US manufacturing to make a meaningful resurgence, be prepared for that $60 air fryer you bought on Amazon last week to cost $140 the minute US workers start making it. The last time our country experienced a trade surplus was 1975, and I would wager we don't see another one during any one of our lifetimes. Alex wants to know about house hunting with an agent. My expectations are you give a realtor set metrics, they punch it into the MLS, and results are sent to prospective buyers by email. My significant other's thinking is more like when our parents bought houses, told a realtor what types of houses they liked, and agent filters through listings to find the type. Okay, I think I get the gist of the question. Essentially, what role does an agent play when you're buying a house? On any given day, there are, say, 100 new listings that get entered into our local multiple listing service here in the capital region. 60 might be single family homes, 10 are commercial buildings, another 10 are vacant apartments looking to be leased, 20 are some form of multifamily building. I'm not sifting through each one of these listings saying, oh, that's a great fit for Bob, or Sue would really love that backyard. I view my responsibilities first and foremost as educating you, the buyer, on what the current housing market looks like, negotiating the best possible purchase agreement based on what you tell me is most important to you, and to provide quality service providers, people like lenders, home inspectors, attorneys, when you ask for help. But on the front end, give me your criteria and the database gods will do the heavy lifting for us. This next one is fun. Steve, workers at the Latham Starbucks are one of the first in the country to unionize. What do you think? I think it's great. Let's first set the table. Back in the 1980s, roughly 1 out of every 5 US workers were members of a union. Today, that number is cut roughly in half. Now, I've never been a union member, nor have I been part of management where direct reports of mine were union members. So my perspective here is very much as an outsider. But for me personally, and this is just Steve talking here, I would never want to be part of a union. I don't want third-party collective bargaining on my behalf. I want to be compensated strictly on my job performance in my chosen field, not as a group and based on some predetermined wage scale that was put together when I wasn't even in the room. However, what I believe is best for me isn't necessarily great for all of mankind. You could be an Amazon warehouse worker and be fantastic at your job, but be terrible at salary negotiations, which is absolutely a skill. There are a multitude of reasons this could be the case. You skew introvert and confrontation is just extremely upsetting to you. Maybe you've just never done it before. Perhaps English isn't your first language, or you might just not even have access to data on what the going rate for your job title is. These are all perfectly acceptable reasons why you might benefit from union membership. My feelings on this are geared very much towards the private sector world. Where my patience starts to wear thin is with the public sector. When, for example, Major League Baseball players go on strike, it's a bit of a bummer, right? But we get over it. When city sanitation workers don't show up, we have a public health emergency on our hands. Too often we see groups like teachers go on strike the day before school starts. Why do they do this? Because they have all of the leverage. Unlike coffee, where I can just go down the street to a competitor, there's no easy alternative for schooling. A healthy back and forth is what all negotiations should strive to look like. But unfortunately, all too often, public sector unions often take advantage of the very people that they're hired to assist. Next question. Steve, I feel like everyone lies these days. Well, that's more of a comment than a question, but yeah, I agree. There's a lot of nonsense out there. The news, from my perspective, is unwatchable. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of professional wrestling in that both are more forms of entertainment than any real substance. Our politicians absolutely lie to us. There's something about the skill set required to win an election that far too often leaves us with some real knuckleheads. So, what's left? Well, to quote the great philosopher Yogati, women lie, men lie, numbers don't lie. I trust markets above everything else. Financial markets, betting markets. You show me where people are laying down cold hard cash, and I'll show you what outcomes are actually most likely. Buyers and sellers freely coming together gives us an equilibrium. And more often than not, the equilibrium is the actual truth. Last one. Steve, how much time would I have to set aside if I were to own rental properties? Great question. It's very much a choose your own adventure in that you can be involved as much or as little as you want to be. Someone just getting started, maybe they earn a modest income at their day job. I would encourage you to take on as much as possible. Enjoy the process. It's a great learning experience. Develop basic home repair skills. Educate yourself on how to screen tenant applications. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're, say, a doctor, an attorney, a high income earner, you should be focusing all of your attention on your career and hire everything out when it comes to managing your rentals. Now, it won't ever be 100% passive. You do occasionally want to touch base with your property manager, but that's easy. That's a very light lift. So I can't give you an exact figure on how many hours you would need to dedicate. It's going to be very dependent upon the size of your property and how involved in the process you want to be. But for almost everybody listening to this podcast, when you factor in appreciation, mortgage paydown, monthly cash flow, the hourly income from rentals will far outpace that of your W-2. That's it. Thanks for listening. If you or someone you know has a real estate related need, let's connect. Steven@sjlincoln.com is the email address. sjlincoln.com/book a call is the website. Steven@sjlincoln.com. sjlincoln.com/book a call. We'll talk again soon.